Archie Giant Series 527. Sabrina's friends go over to her house to watch a scary 3D movie on TV. Somehow Reggie jokes that Jughead has two heads because he's wearing 3D glasses. I don't know how people could stand to wear those glasses when one of the lenses was tinted a different color than the other one. Sabrina can't get anything on the TV set, and she's told by Zelda that her TV's been broken for a couple of days. Why is she just now learning about this? Kids use the TV every day. Somehow Reggie doubts that she could fix the TV, even though he usually knows she's a witch, and she casts a spell that they'd all hear, telling her magic to make the show on the screen scary and real. But she somehow fails at her spell because she doesn't show them the movie they wanted. Wouldn't magic know what movie she wanted and look for information about it? Wouldn't her magic know how to fix a TV? Like I assumed it'd do. Magic already researches information that the user wouldn't know to create things constantly. Instead, her magic is extremely obvious by having the main character of the new movie look like Sabrina. So in the movie, Sabrina's said to live in an old house and spend her time drawing monsters. One day, a statue of a monster showed up on her roof, and someone resembling Reggie notices it move, but isn't believed and wants to stay and watch. I hate that Reggie thinks the movie's too ridiculous now. He knows Sabrina's a witch. He wouldn't think a story about one is too stupid. In the story, Reggie climbs a tree to get a better look at the monster and sees it fly over to Sabrina when she's holding a box of wood and coal. The branch breaks and he falls. The movie ends with a dragon flying away with Reggie, with a narration saying that he was never seen again. And I thought the dragon was told to rescue him from his fall by Sabrina. This makes no sense because if she's a witch, why doesn't she just use magic to rescue him? That's jarringly dark. I guess in this story she doesn't feel like it. Or she can only use magic by using the sketch pad to draw monsters. Jughead thinks the story is stupid just because it's creative, so he's got bad taste. Archie's not scared. The kids notice that Reggie's disappeared, and Sabrina tells her screaming friends to check the chocolate shop. The story ends with Reggie at the shop safe and sound. More in character for Sabrina, because a dragon carried him there to achieve the desired effect of scaring her friends. This story is about Sabrina inviting her friends over to see a horror movie on TV when they're supposed to be just kids. I guess her aunts are lenient. And somehow she didn't know until right the second that her TV was broken. Instead of simply fixing the TV with magic like I assumed, so that it could show the actual movie, we have a more creative and impressive story that makes magic too obvious by having the characters in it look just like Sabrina and Reggie to look interesting to the audience. Her friends not freaking out would only make sense if they were already used to her being a witch. She'd have realized this a long time ago and stopped being so worried about her friends discovering she's a witch. It's a story about Sabrina using a sketch pad to create monsters by drawing pictures. And when Reggie gets carried away by the dragon, she does nothing to rescue him. I guess this means Sabrina hates Reggie, since it's Reggie in particular. She finally resents him enough to make a story like this, and it's off-putting for someone who's supposed to be too nice. And what's also confusing at first is that Reggie actually gets warped away to the chocolate shop. But it's explained that she did that to scare her friends because they weren't impressed with her idea of a scary movie. It seemed arbitrary that she made a dragon in the story because there's no explanation for it and it's not in character for Sabrina. Betty Me 135. Sabrina implies that she's never seen so many strange creatures in one place and she's standing in front of her house when Hilda's throwing a monster party. It's always been confusing that someone as hot-tempered as Hilda, who hates when her stuff gets damaged by a Harvey, throws parties for anyone. But it's supposed to make sense because she's doing it to socialize with non-mortals for once because she's a witch. And since her friends aren't mortals, she's more forgiving of being made to have to fix broken stuff. Sabrina sees some normal-looking men show up in a car and thinks they're at the wrong place. It turns out it's a two-headed man. There's no reason they wouldn't have hurt her. Archie's TV Lap Out Issue 91. Sabrina complains that her house is full of people from the demon world, and they're all here for Hilda's party. How did she meet these people? We never see her leave the planet. And she didn't say the witch world. Once a year, she throws a big party for all the goblins, gremlins, and monsters in the world because somehow they actually live on this world, or at least are contactable by her, and somehow weren't discovered by mortal scientists yet. I guess they barely show up here, and everyone assumes they're in costumes. and goblins and gremlins are a separate thing from monsters in this universe. Then with perfect timing, we see an alien spaceship land in a wisely hidden spot in the woods. An alien says that during his visit here, IT said he found plenty of weird things on Earth, but he's dismissed as exaggerating. They see some strange creatures that don't look like anything he ever saw before. He must not have seen a lot of different species of aliens then. He'd just see them as more aliens. Sabrina naturally assumes these aliens are here for the party, and it turns out that IT said that the young people on Earth were very friendly towards him. They must have mistaken him for a cosplayer. That has to be what we're supposed to assume. How could he possibly have a device that tells him that some of these creatures are 500 years old? They aren't physically that age, or else they'd just be dust. I guess the radiometer works by counting how many memories they have, but I'm pretty sure they'd have forgotten most of it in all that time. There's no way the brain can actually hold 500 years' worth of memories in it. Already adults have trouble remembering their childhoods. Hilda says that's a lie. She's only 498 years old and she can prove it. She surprisingly doesn't do anything to prove it. Too bad. I love it when they make jokes with the ants about how they've lived through history. An alien points out a bike, and IT says he blew their minds when he flew one of those things. They fly with the bike. She asks them if they can barrel roll, and her flying makes them lose their balance and fall and get hurt. Thankfully, Sabrina feels guilty, but she doesn't immediately heal him for some reason. The alien's arm is broken, but they're told that with their self-healing powers, he'll be okay in a week. If they outright have self-healing powers, I'd expect it to be faster than that. Sabrina's still sad, so thankfully, Sabrina actually does tell Hilda to heal instantly. Thankfully, while the aliens are amazed, they don't get freaked out and run away screaming. Then one of the aliens says that he loves the brew of theirs, and says he's gotta try some. So in a pleasant twist, the aliens don't run away screaming after all. They do start leaving, but they're perfectly calm, and one of them apologizes for rushing. And Sabrina hopes they had a good time. Hilda says she'll see them again in 7 years, and Ambrose drives by wanting to drop in on Sabrina. He gets shocked at seeing a flying saucer, but Sabrina isn't impressed that he just saw something out of this world because so is everyone at the party. Seriously, how did she meet these people? Didn't the story say that she throws this party once a year, not once every 7 years? This story was about Hilda throwing a big monster party for some reason, and some aliens show up to it. And in a twist, instead of running away screaming freaked out, they actually enjoy themselves. Jokehead 330. While flying on a broom near Sabrina, Hilda throws her hat and Sabrina catches it, and Sabrina says that witches have their own way of playing frisbee. Which is confusing because the hat, while it does have a disc shape on one side, it's shaped like a hat on the other side. So we should have seen Hilda cast a spell to make it move through the air like a frisbee. This is more like a game of regular catch. But it was surprisingly sweet to see her and Hilda playing a game together. Archie at Riverdale High 88. All that happens here is that Hilda tries to use magic against Ambrose and fails. Ambrose has the same problem, and Ambrose somehow remarks that the magic has gone out of their relationship, instead of just assuming they both ran out of magic earlier. And logically, why would they say all those silly magic words when doing that? Usually they don't need to. Archie Giant Series 532. Ambrose tells Hilda he'd like to be a bullfighter and jokes around pretending to be a good one, and predictably Hilda uses magic to make a bull hit him. This desire of his is harder to watch now that bullfighting's been banned in most Mexico. Archie and Me 141. For no apparent reason, Sabrina offers Ambrose some of the brew Hilda's making. He tries some, thinks it's too salty, and Hilda's dumping an entire bag of salt in the next panel. Why would she do that? I guess she told Sabrina to give it to him as a joke, and Sabrina wasn't aware that he'd think it was too salty. Archie Giant Series 533. Sabrina doesn't like studying for history class, so she says Hilda and Zelda must have had it easy as teenagers because there wasn't as much history to learn. Zelda says that Sabrina thinks her generation had it easy. Everyone in that room should know that she's only talking about when it comes to history class. And I assume she means that her aunts were in history class in the witch world, because girls weren't being educated as teenagers centuries ago on Earth. It looks like Hilda has a beard in this panel. Sabrina wishes she could go back in time to what she should know are not the good days. Why would she say she wishes she could when she'd know that witches can do anything? Hilda tells her to step through her magic mirror to go to Salem in 1692. Sabrina would know better than this. But since she knows Sabrina's omnipotent, it makes sense that she'd assume Sabrina could handle herself even without her. It's less insulting than assuming that her all-powerful witch niece needs someone to protect her. But this is still an idiot plot. Sabrina somehow jokes that she'd never want to return. She likes that there's no pollution and smog in the past, and then sees people dunking a woman to get her to confess something. And Sabrina's told by someone who somehow doesn't insult her modern clothing that if she doesn't confess, that proves she's a witch because no real witch would confess. And I guess if she does confess, they'll still assume she's a witch. I assume that all of those people think witches are a lot more limited in powers than they are, because that explains why they're taking the risk of doing this to a supposed witch. An actual witch would be able to handle herself against a mob effortlessly, and would have to be unconscious to even get tied up. But Sabrina couldn't tell them that without being accused of being a witch for having witch information they don't. I love that Sabrina's carrying her cat Salem in Salem, especially since nobody points it out. She lampshades their logic, but is smart enough not to do so to their faces. Sabrina uses magic to free a woman dressed like an obvious witch from her stocks. She gets spanked, says to people that she escaped, and gets told that she has to take her place in the stocks for not preventing the person's escape. Sabrina thinks that her zapping hand's stuck, so she can't use magic to free herself. Couldn't she still point ahead of her and summon something to save her? Why did she let someone put her in this situation? She could have warped further back in time. Then the old guy who put her there in the first place says he'll help her out of the stocks and then expects to be kissed for freeing her. So she turns him into a frog with a hat. But people just so happen to be behind her to see that, which doesn't seem likely to me. Maybe it was all a trap to see if she's actually a witch or not. They chase after her, wanting to hang her. For no reason, Sabrina doesn't just point at them to brainwash them into thinking that persecuting witches is wrong, which you'd think witches could also do, since they can brainwash people. She jumps into a pond and assumes she'll get home, but nothing happened because she jumped into the wrong pond. You'd think they'd be mad at her for wearing pants as a woman back then, and that'd be why she'd end up in stocks back then. Why can't she just point to herself to go back to her time? Why doesn't she say a spell? A dog bites off a part of Sabrina's pants, and somehow that makes her go, ouch! And she says she understands why Salem hates dogs. She jumps into the actual magic pond and goes back to Hilda, who isn't surprised, and she refuses to go to a nostalgia party with her friends because she's done with nostalgia. While the story is a lot longer than the story in Archie's madhouse where she went to Salem, I have to admit that it's better because it's longer. Even if there's no reason for it to last that long, at least stuff gets to actually happen in it. The next story grabs my attention right away and then confuses me because it starts out with characters I've never seen before on another planet. A woman on a big TV screen tells a guy named Ovo that she can't attend the Imperial Ball with him this evening because she has a headache. And the guy with a dumb name thinks she's doing the old headache routine. If these are futuristic people, it's so odd that they still have Imperial Balls instead of calling it a dance. He's the richest kid in 5 systems, so suddenly I have a harder time sympathizing with him as he whines that he got stood up when his family is royalty. He drives away in his spaceship because he somehow thinks that'll make him feel better. He's told to beware of pirates, but he assumes no spaceship would be able to damage his spaceship because it's so souped up. I guess he's not rich enough to have a force field always around it, so that it'd actually be invincible. Our time is wasted seeing things from the pirates' perspective, and Obo decides to outrun them. And Earth is the nearest planet with good cloud cover. Once you lead the pirates here, then we see Harvey tell Sabrina that he can't take her to the party because he clearly has a cold. I think I know where the story is going from here. The story should have started here with the characters we care about. Sabrina's polite enough to just tell him to take 2 aspirin, and she reveals that when she's upset, reshaping a few clouds has a soothing effect. While that does make magic too obvious, I still think it's awesome. The wrong word for effect was used there. She makes a cloud the shape of a moth, but it just looks like she summoned a giant moth because of its color. Ovo gave the pirates the slip, and his sensors detect a non-electrical cloud disturbance. He goes over to Sabrina, who admits what she did with relatable nervousness. She admits she's a witch, no problem, and explains that she's dressed for a costume party. Predictably, they decide to go out together even though that's disloyal to their respective dates. Surprisingly, Sabrina's gonna take him to her costume party instead of us getting to see what his imperial ball is like. When you'd think that since he's so upset at being stood up because he's royalty, he wouldn't want to take the blow to his reputation of not getting to go to the imperial ball. And he says she can see better in the dark already, and I assume that's because he knows she's a witch and was oddly calm about it. Alien or not, wouldn't he still be scared if he apparently never knew Earthlings could have magic? So he'd be too scared for this plot to happen. It's also stilted that she said teenage witch. She's lucky he's so brave. Ovo smartly hides his spaceship up in a tree, and they take his slow tractor beams to go to the ground. Sabrina makes a painful pun, and he's polite enough not to insult her for it. Then the story bores me by having Sabrina talk about people in costumes. It turns out the pirates have found him, even though he evaded them in the clouds. Sabrina creates duplicates of him that disappear to confuse them, and already she's all out of magic. I thought she'd use magic on the pirates directly to make them not a threat anymore. She could also freeze time, for everyone but him. There was no excuse for not turning them into frogs or something. She's already exposing magic by casting a spell, so why not? He runs into the spaceship tractor beam and thanks her, and says his ship can outrun theirs. At least she gets complimented by people for her date's looks. He was at the party for such a small amount of time that this was necessary to make this seem worth it for her. By the way, I did a word search on the word Harvey in the document with my 80s Sabrina reviews, and this story is the last story where Harvey appears in it for a very long time. It's as if they broke up after that. Maybe because he found out she cheated on him with Ovo. I guess the writers got tired of him for a while. In the next story, we see Sabrina's aunt in purple outfits for once. Zelda presents Sabrina with a birthday cake, and Sabrina assumes that she baked it instead of creating it with no evidence, which hopefully means that she cares enough about her to go to the effort of baking it every time. And Sabrina's fairy witch mother out of complete nowhere wants to grant her a birthday wish, even though she can grant her own wishes. She's appeared in a few stories before this, but it's still confusing because the Sabrina comics have no continuity, and her fairy witch mother looks different every time. She says that right now she has to go to a big birthday date with a guy named Billy instead of Harvey for no apparent reason. At least explain that Harvey cheated on her. It's sloppy. He says he just blew all of his money on arcade games. Why isn't this Harvey then? He's just like him anyways. The writer was so bored of Harvey, but all he did was use a different name and character design. At least he apologizes to her. She wishes she could find out what boys see in those video games. Play them then. Her fairy godmother decides to send her into a parallel universe just like one of the arcade games, and makes it so that one of the gamers can almost hurt her by interacting with the arcade machine from another universe. Wasn't it immediately obvious to her that she was supposed to use magic so that Sabrina would play an arcade game and see what the boys saw in them? I have to assume that she's just so angry that she didn't want to get her wish granted right away that she's punishing her for it. Because she should know she'd hate this. It was really spiteful of the fairy godmother to apparently cast a spell so that she can't use magic when trapped in those other universes, and has to experience all of them. She could have gotten her eaten by Pac-Man. How does she not know what Pac-Man is called? Surprisingly, the story cuts ahead to her back in the arcade and safe again, and all she does is sarcastically thank her. Then Billy tells her that he just found money to buy her a sundae. It's so predictable that he plans on bringing her to the arcade. Then she's an asshole to him, throwing a sundae on his head instead of just saying no, or being smart and playing the arcade games herself, which clearly would make her happier than her previous experience. This isn't in character for her. This is literally something Veronica would do. Then there's another story I can already tell could be terrible because Dell's going to be needlessly mean to her. It turns out Sabrina is nearly overdrawn in her Zap account again. What, magic costs money now? I thought witches had a magic battery in them. That's been referenced multiple times before in the 70s comic. And it's completely out of character for Della to be mad at her for using magic too much and call her wasteful because she's the same character who encouraged her to use magic a lot more. Multiple times. We read this comic to see her use magic, so this is completely missing the appeal of the franchise. There's no reason she would suspend her magic for 24 hours because in a time of crisis, she'll have no energy to zap with. Well, now she definitely won't have any energy. At that point, she'd just let her keep her powers, but punish her if she uses them for something other than saving her own life. This story sucks! Sabrina says she can do everything right by herself, and puts her pants on backwards. After she talks about her jogging shoes, then for no reason at all, they get covered in smoke, and replaced with old leather loafers. So a kid shines them up. Then we see her shopping at the Witch Mart, but it's boringly normal aside from the ingredients it's got, implying that the writer isn't as inspired. She sees a guy grab a woman's purse. I thought this was in the witch realm, so why on earth is nobody using magic to stop him? And why is he not warping home? How would an actual Witch Mart stay in business on Earth? It should have just been a regular supermarket then. Her grocery bag rips and spills out apples to make him conveniently slip and hurt his head. A guy who works at the market goes over to her and says he'll get her another bag. There's no way a police car would already be here. Sure was lucky that a policeman was already on his way to his car from the store at this time. Sabrina thanks the guy for putting her food in another bag. He walks her home and she thanks a guy other than her boyfriend for asking her to the movie tonight. This is so sloppy, just explain that she's on a break with Harvey. Then the story as Sabrina brags to Della about what she accomplished, and Della wants to find out if Brad has an older brother. Since she has no moral compass, why hasn't she zapped up a loyal boyfriend for herself to cater to her every whim? Oh boy, this issue. The first story was an idiot plot where Sabrina somehow thinks she'd love to go back to Salem in the witch hanging days. At least it got a surprising historical accuracy because they wanted to hang her, not burn her. And she was smart enough to not try to tell them to stop killing witches. And Hilda was insanely irresponsible by letting her go there without the ability to warp back home with a single point. Or not telling her she can do that. Not even giving her magic words to bring her home immediately. When she can't use magic when trapped in the stocks to get herself out, apparently. So apparently she needed protection. She even lets her bring the cat with her. The second story has her go to the costume party very briefly with a human alien, who's very conveniently not afraid of her for being a witch, which would cause a whole plot not to happen, or asking to take advantage of her powers constantly. If he was going to go to her party, instead of us getting to see what the ball was like for some reason, the only point of him showing up was that he had a tractor beam to get there and some pirates tracked him down. The first page of the story was off-putting because it had none of the Sabrina characters in it. And if he wasn't going to go to the ball anyways, it shouldn't have existed. Why would it end with aliens being trapped on Earth? Sabrina would have just turned them all into frogs or something, not been stupid. It did seem inspired that the writer bothered to make Ovo a member of this futuristic Jetson-style society with an imperial ball. The third story was about Sabrina's fairy witch mother who exists for no reason at all, forcing her to be in universes where the arcade games are real, even though she should know she'd just be scared. And there's no explanation for why she doesn't instantly warp out of them and never use her powers to make the story more interesting when she should know that could get her killed. I have to assume she's punishing her for not making a wish right away, but that makes me hate her even more. She obviously needed to make her experience the arcade games the way a normal person would. This just makes me sad because she doesn't get to see the fun in video games. The final story has Della be completely out of character and suspend her powers because she used them too much, even though she's always been about encouraging her to use magic more. Which is better because magic is the whole appeal of the franchise. At least Sabrina eventually gets some success without her powers. But it's so confusing at first that she wants to date a guy other than Harvey with no explanation. Again. This issue is by Bob Bowling, and as you can tell by the story with Ovo in it, this is clearly the same guy who wrote the story where Sabrina went to Atlantis, and the story with Professor Pither in it. His stories are more out there for Sabrina, showing other civilizations of advanced humans in it and doing stuff Sabrina doesn't do, like Professor Pither threatening a boat race. And a lot of these stories didn't make sense. This issue didn't properly fit Sabrina, with her even dating the wrong guy. Honestly, I found the cover off-putting right away. He's got the most unique ideas, but is bad at executing them. He reminds me of one of my least favorite Sonic writers. I wonder if he didn't want to write for Sabrina, but got stuck with it when he'd rather write something else, like science fiction apparently. Because people in Atlantis and a mad scientist and Ovo's advanced civilization of aliens have nothing to do with witches. Not that a change of pace is always bad, but when he's constantly making plot holes that make it take forever to review the issue, then I can't exactly take him seriously. He just seems like he's meant for writing a different genre or franchise, and I wonder why he got roped into Sabrina. Everything's Archie 108. Sabrina says she hates going to the 3D movies with Hilda because she always gets carried away. That isn't the case in an earlier story involving her in a 3D movie. Hilda sees someone in the movie try to throw knives and spears at the camera, and she uses magic to send it back, somehow forgetting that she's watching a movie around mortals. Why would she make this mistake more than once? And why would Sabrina take her to a 3D film more than once? Betty and Me, issue 136. Hilda says it'll be nice to hear the gentle patter of little feet again. Sabrina assumes she means that she likes kids, and Hilda says she doesn't. And she's holding a convention for goblins in their house. They don't look like goblins. They look like a bunch of random creatures. And none of them look the same species as one of the others. I wish I knew why she was holding that convention in her house just because she's a witch. Archie and Me 142. A vending machine tells Hilda to deposit the change, which impresses Sabrina. And Hilda isn't impressed because witches came up with that idea centuries ago. But then we see a talking cauldron. So by idea, she was just speaking generally to mean talking objects. She must have done this out of loneliness and boredom because there'd be no use to it.